Here are some of the worst people who love to scam the elderly. Number 10. Sleight of Hand. Scammers don't always target their elderly victims' cash. Authorities in California targeted a group of criminals believed to be snatching valuable jewelry from predominantly older Asian American individuals throughout the Bay Area. Investigators say the criminals struck up conversations with their masks before offering an inexpensive trinket or piece of jewelry to the victim. When they reached out to hand over the cheap jewelry, they grabbed a piece of expensive jewelry from the older person so quickly that the victim didn't even know it was happening. Video evidence presented as part of the investigation reportedly showed an 82-year-old woman engaged in a conversation with a younger woman in a vehicle. Shortly after, her gold necklace went missing, and the unsuspecting victim had no idea. Although sleight-of-hand crimes have been a problem for generations, police in the area said elderly Asian Americans were specifically targeted in this scheme. Police also noted that most victims did not report the crimes. Still, they arrested 2 people after community members came forward with tips. Number 9. The Farmer. Police arrested an Ohio woman they suspected of hatching a scheme with her husband to defraud her mother out of $750,000. Authorities say Lisa Braniff was granted power of attorney over her mother in 2015 and quickly started skimming as much money as possible for herself. Although she was supposed to be using the money for her mother's expenses, Braniff was accused of living the high life while the elderly woman was stuck with the tab. At one point, she even bought a farm with the stolen cash. Meanwhile, her mother suffered from cognitive decline and required constant care from nursing home staff. In 2018, the scam was discovered, and Braniff was no longer allowed to make financial decisions for her mother. Sadly, it was too late. Her money was all gone. Braniff's mother contracted COVID-19 and passed away in 2020. Her daughter and son-in-law, Joseph Braniff, were indicted on theft charges. Lisa was also charged with forgery. A court order authorized police to raid the farm and freeze the couple's assets. Number 8. The Grandson. In 2022, a Connecticut man named Douglas Senerth was arrested for scamming his grandparents out of almost $700,000, mostly in fraudulent college expenses. Federal authorities determined the scheme started in 2011 and played out for another 8 years. Senerth convinced his grandparents to authorize $419,000 in transactions they believed were related to college during that time. As far as they were concerned, he was attending school in Massachusetts and Oxford, England. Prosecutors say he scammed them out of another $260,000 after claiming his professor gave him a can't-miss investment tip. In reality, Senerth was never enrolled in college at all. He hatched a plan that involved faking a range of official documents to back up his college story. Although he was initially arrested on unrelated charges, the fraud eventually caught up with him. Police slapped him with charges that could land him behind bars for 20 years. Senerth must have been involved with some pretty bad people. Police arrested him on burglary charges after he broke into several homes in the neighborhood. They also arrested him in 2017 for conspiring to sell ammunition. In addition to pleading guilty to the wire fraud, a judge ordered Senerth to pay restitution to his grandparents. Number 7. The Granddaughter. Jenna Quiles thought she could use her grandfather's bank account as her piggy bank. Unfortunately, elderly people are among the most vulnerable to financial fraudsters, even those within their own families. Authorities say she made 275 fraudulent transactions, resulting in a net gain of more than $190,000 directly from the 86-year-old's bank account. They began investigating the crime in late 2021, but Quiles had been exploiting her grandfather for nearly 2 years. Detectives tracked the suspect down after her name was found on multiple bank receipts. The elderly victim said he provided his granddaughter with money for a slew of personal expenses, but he never gave her permission to make direct withdrawals. Police booked Quiles on one charge of exploiting the elderly. They did note that she expressed regret and remorse for her behavior, but that's clearly not going to make up for scamming her own grandfather out of nearly $200,000. Number 6. The Sugar Baby. Many romantic relationships flourish despite significant age differences. For Lynn Halfin, her marriage to a man more than 50 years her senior was nothing more than a scam. She was arrested in late 2019 after she tried to cash a $1 million check from 77-year-old Richard Rappaport's bank account. Prosecutors said she brought the check to a teller at a Florida bank and claimed that she needed the money so that she and her husband could purchase a yacht. Bank employees grew suspicious and refused to cash the enormous check. Later that day, she tried again with 3 checks, each made out for $333,333. This time, bank staffers called the police. Halfin initially claimed that she mailed the 3 checks to her native Israel, but police say a man in New Jersey cashed 2 of them only a few days after her attempts in Florida. Investigators alerted the bank, and it stopped the transaction for the 3rd check. At first, her husband came to her defense and argued against her deportation to Israel. He later acknowledged that he did not sign the checks and had not authorized any such payment. Police were waiting at the Tampa International Airport to arrest her on suspicion of money laundering, exploiting an elderly person, and organized fraud. She was locked up under $1 million bail. Surprisingly, Lynn's story doesn't end there. Check out this full video to learn how crazy Lynn's scam really was and how she tried to blame it on a psychic. Number 5. The hidden camera. Pauline Guthrie's relatives grew suspicious of a woman named Mary Reardon who was serving as Pauline's caretaker. Her loved ones hatched a plan to hide a camera inside of an air freshener container, and what they discovered proved that they were right to be wary. The footage showed the British woman swiping cash out of Guthrie's drawer while the elderly victim took a bath. Investigators believe Reardon stole nearly 1,000 pounds from Guthrie over a few weeks beginning in September 2015. The family members were concerned that Guthrie's money seemed to be vanishing and decided to install the hidden surveillance camera. The caretaker was caught on tape stealing money from the woman's drawer on at least 5 separate occasions. Reardon was arrested and pleaded guilty to the charges against her. As a result of her plea deal, she received a suspended jail sentence along with fines and other costs. After she was caught, she expressed some relief that it was all over and wanted to make things right with Guthrie. Although she claimed she needed the money to care for her children, the court determined that her circumstance was no excuse for betraying the trust of an elderly woman in her care. Her defense attorney said the temptation was too great for the struggling mother to resist, adding that her client felt awful and always got along with Miss Guthrie. Number 4. The worst bank. Some con artists target elderly victims by promising massive returns on investments. This age-old scheme caught up with Darrell Bank, a disgraced financial advisor convicted of scamming hundreds of aging individuals out of more than $25 million. Bank was found guilty of more than 24 charges, including conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and selling unregistered securities. Even his attorney was in on the crime and was sentenced to 10 years behind bars for his role. Bank had been a successful investment advisor and even hosted a syndicated radio program on the topic. In 2010, however, regulators stripped him of his credentials over allegations of misappropriation and lying. Nevertheless, he refused to leave the industry and set up a company in Virginia through which he convinced elderly victims to turn over their retirement funds in hopes of making a big profit. Instead of investing the cash, Bank took most of it for himself, funneling it through various shell companies and ultimately using it for his personal expenses. He received a 35-year prison sentence for the heartless crime. Prosecutor Raj Parekh said that the case should serve to dissuade other would-be scammers. He added that Bank and his accomplices weren't only guilty of taking cash from his victims, but the emotional harm they inflicted was pure evil. Number 3. The Gambler. Wisconsin resident Cassie Wojciechowski is another caretaker who ripped off her elderly client. She was arrested on suspicion of scamming a 70-year-old victim out of more than $400,000. Most of that money funded her lousy gambling habits. Over a 2-year con job, she used the victim's credit card more than 1,300 times. Prosecutors say she also used the same card to pay personal bills and give her relatives more than $80,000. This all took place while receiving $1,250 per month for her caretaking services. She spent roughly $140,000 to fund her gambling addiction, and we assume she didn't win very often. Wojciechowski pleaded guilty to theft charges and was ordered to pay more than $300,000 in restitution. She also received an 18-month prison term and more than 18 years of supervision following her release. Number 2. The Waitress. Many criminals exploit the kindness and trusting nature of their victims. For a waitress in Massachusetts, that meant faking a terminal illness to scam an 84-year-old man out of more than $100,000. Donald Hodgins thought he was helping Anissa Lega pay her expensive medical bills, including brain surgery, when he gave her $30,000. He thought the rest of the money went toward Lega's personal bills and living expenses. In reality, prosecutors said she was on a lavish trip to Miami when she was supposed to be having surgery. While Lega didn't deny receiving money and gifts from Hodgins, she insisted that it was only because he was physically attracted to her. She said he made up the entire complaint because he was upset that she was dating someone else. Hodgins was a regular at the restaurant where she worked, and the two got to know each other. They became closer when he hired her to clean his home approximately 3 months before being arrested. She appeared in court and pleaded not guilty to the larceny charge against her. The judge threw her behind bars and set bail at an ironic $100,000. Hodgins thought he was helping a friend, but felt like a real sucker in the end. Number 1. The ring test. Florida police investigated a ploy to scam elderly victims out of their valuables. The plan involved a man and woman who went door to door, offering to test the authenticity of people's jewelry. In late 2021, the suspects convinced a 92-year-old woman to turn over 14 gold rings. The male scammer placed all the jewelry in a tray and submerged the pieces in some type of liquid. Then he asked the owner to grab a glass of water. When she returned, all but one of the rings were missing. The brazen criminal said the 13 rings dissolved in the liquid because they were fake. Of course, they were just stuffed in the scammer's pockets. Authorities called attention to the case in hopes that someone would come forward with information about the two suspects. Video of the pair was released publicly, and the local sheriff's department urged anyone with information to come forward. In the meantime, police advised elderly citizens to use caution and avoid any suspicious situations. Click here to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comments section who'd you'd rather punch, telescammers or elderly scammers.